And I'm live. Oh, again, Gordon Causey, or Gordy Canuck, if you prefer the title. I go by both. Gordy Canuck is more of an online moniker. And this is Candy the Wonder Pup, Wonder Dog. She only has one name. Shake, let's speak. Lay down, lay down, speak, speak. All right, come on up and get it. That's the start of all my videos if you're new. I have been conditioned by my dog. I talk a lot on my station about being programmed by media, by CBC, CTV Global, or in the US by CNN, MSNBC, and all the rest. How they program us what to think, what to believe, and even how to feel. Well, my dog has programmed me. I have Lovian response. I do a video, she expects a treat, and I do a video, and I know I have to get a treat for her, or else she's going to claw and scratch at me and won't give me any peace. Now I have peace. Where are we? It is now the last day of the month of April, 2025, and it's 9:19 so I started a few minutes late. I just wanted to, now we've got the Canadian election is firmly in the rear view mirror. The results are what they are. I accept them. I know that there are some conservative voices out there speculating on nefarious actions and pencil versus pen on a ballot, etc. The results are what the results are. And for what it's worth, I'll give myself a little pat on the back. I acknowledge when my predictions don't come true. During the US election, before it got officially underway, I had speculated that I thought there was a very strong possibility that Joe Biden would, in some way, shape, or form, be removed from office. There's the 25th Amendment to the US Constitution, which allows a procedure to remove the sitting president, in which case Kamala Harris. I was thinking there was a strong possibility. I was almost predicting it. I might have predicted it that she would be installed. She would be sworn in as the 47th president, and then that Trump would have been the 48th. But that didn't happen. So I was wrong. So I'll, you know, when I get things wrong, I own them. But in terms of the Canadian election, I can't say I got 100%, but I was rewatching a video I put out on January 18th, back when my laptop had crapped out and I was using a crappy little tablet because that's all I had to go live with. And in that video, now that was January 18th, that was before the Liberal leadership race. And I was speculating at that point that it was one, a Mark Carney coronation, and that I'm hardly alone. That was obvious to anyone. But I further speculated that Mark Carney could resurrect liberal fortunes. And I said it in a few videos in and around that time that I could see the liberals under Carney pushing the conservatives down to a minority. Because back in December, January, it was looking like the Conservative Party was going to romp to a majority 200 plus seat victory in the House of Commons. Max Power has shown up. Good evening, my friend. Good evening. Happy Wednesday. And Betty from Niagara is here. Wonderful. Max, I don't know what part of the country you're in, if you don't mind sharing. And if you don't want to share, that's okay too. But at any rate, uh, that the I lose my train of thought so easily when I look down. Oh, this is good. Max is in Alberta because that's more or less the topic that's the subject of tonight's video. But just getting back to what I was talking about back in January, December of last year, January this year, I was already speculating that a at that time, it was widely believed that Pierre Poilievre, he was, heading to a massive majority, and I was a fly in the ointment, somewhat saying, "Look, a Mark Carney-led Liberal Party could push the Conservatives down to a minority," and I said, and I even think it's possible that he could maybe get a minority himself. Now, I did not I'm not going to get, I did not foresee the size of the minority that the Liberals got. 269 seats, three short of a majority. It's effectively a majority government. In order for the opposition parties to topple the government, if the Conservatives decide they want to take the Liberals down, obviously they don't have the seats in of them, they don't have enough on their own, but not only do they not have enough seats on their own, but even if they just add the Bloc Québécois, they still don't have enough. They would need the Conservatives, if they wanted to put forth a motion of no confidence, in order for that no confidence motion to pass and for the Carney-led Liberal government to topple, they would need both the Bloc Québécois and the NDP to join in with them. And I'm here to tell you that will not happen. That will Mark Carney would have to introduce the most horrific legislation imaginable to have all three of those parties come together. The Bloc Québécois, they are there to serve the interests of Quebec only. And likewise, they like their jobs. They're making $250,000 a year, probably in salary, perks, and benefits. And do they want to go to an election and risk losing that job? Likewise with the NDP. There's no way that we are going to see a vote of no confidence. This will be a Liberal government likely for the next 4 years. And I think it's going to be a scary 4 years because of what Mark Carney has promised. The more I'm learning about his book, Values, the less I have not read it myself, so I can't speak authoritatively on the book. But what I am hearing about it and about his being all in on this notion of getting us to net zero, meaning no carbon emissions, net zero carbon emissions. Carbon capture for every 100 megatons of carbon we put out, we got to capture 100 tons or whatever. I don't know the terminology well enough. I'm not an environmentalist. But with that being said, I don't want to come across as a total troglodyte. Clean air, clean soil, clean water, these are good things. And government has a role to play in ensuring that we have clean air, clean water, clean soil. But in terms of carbon being the big bad boogeyman that Google says it is, they say, according to Google and YouTube, they will say that it's a proven fact that fossil fuel emissions are the primary driver of climate change now. Never before, but now all of a sudden, whatever. I've said enough on that already. Let me read what's being written. SRCX is always starting with the same off-grid Yukon, Canada, with the elk and the moose and the lynx and everything else, and the grizzlies that are up there with SRCX. A resident certain type of disturber, but that's okay. Max is saying that personally, now getting to the subject line of this video, is separation in the cards. Will Alberta look to separate? I don't think it's anything on the near-term horizon. I think Alberta, those inclined toward thinking about separation are in wait and see mode. We'll have to wait. I'm not even sure. I was checking the parliamentary calendar to see when Parliament will reconvene, and I haven't been able to find that information out. If anyone knows it, share it in the live chat. But I'm not even sure when Canada's Parliament will resume. And then Carney has to name his cabinet, and he does not need Carney does not need to be sworn in as prime minister. He's the prime minister. I forget what exact day he was sworn in, whenever it was in March, early March, he was sworn in. Then he got on that plane and flew off to France, flew off to England, didn't do anything. It was campaigning. He was campaigning in advance of the election, making sure that he's at the top of the news feed. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, was in France today, meeting with Emmanuel Macron and discussing trade relations and the growing tensions between Canada and the US. What agreements were signed, what accords were reached, nothing. It was just, it was photo opportunities. And then he did the same thing in England. But uh, in 6 months, a year from now, I think we'll have a better gauge as to where the sentiment is lying. Um, anyway, Matt's saying personally that he wants to remain in Canada and he wants to remain a Canadian, but it does concern him that the Carney government will create a unity crisis. I'm thinking back to the era of the old Reform Party, and that was initially thought to be something of a protest movement. They wanted a triple E Senate, elective, effective, and equal, or there were three E's, and two of them were elected and effective, because right now Canada's Senate is appointed. The prime minister, when a seat becomes vacant, the prime minister appoints someone. And the Reform Party wanted our Senate, like in the United States, he wanted it to be an elected body. However, it never came to fruition. We still have an appointed Senate. About the only change that has come in, Senate appointments used to be for life. Now, a senator is obligated to retire from that chamber at the age of 75. So as seats become available, it is Mark Carney who will appoint senators in there. And I forgot why I got off. Oh, I was talking about the unity crisis. Well, when that Reform Party was born, and I'm trying to remember exactly when it was when they stormed onto the political scene the first year that Jean Chrétien won government. So in and around 1991, 92, and Reform just stormed in. And one of their key phrases was "the West wants in." The, they coined this term, the Laurentian elites. The Laurentians is cottage country when you live in Quebec. Quebecers, the wealthy have up where Mount Tremblant is, they have their cottages up there, and so they coined this term, the Laurentian elite. And Alberta was tired of being governed by the Laurentian elite. In similar way, in a fashion to the way that American colonials felt when they were being governed by the British. No taxation without representation. They felt that they were being imposed upon by the British. And I would argue that Albertans have a similar sentiment. They feel like the central powers in principally Ontario and Quebec, that they dictate to Alberta. And like it or lump it, you're just stop whining, bitching, and moaning, Alberta. You won the resource lottery, so why should we care about your oil? And I've already expressed my opinion on that, because the reason we should care about Alberta's oil is because Alberta's wealth is Canada's wealth. Anyway, uh, SRCX writes, a group of 3 NDP are now considering crossing the aisle in exchange for NDP future consideration. Either way, SRCX, it doesn't matter. Carney is ruling with majority. And Betty Zoom is writing, did his wife, I'm assuming you mean Carney, say make Canada poor? Well, look into her connections with a group called the Eurasia Group, and look at what they are promoting. I haven't read up enough on it yet. I've just skimmed over a few things, but it sounds dystopian for the great nation state of Canada, or the once great nation state of Canada, that has been in steady and sharp decline for the past 10 years. Max is saying that CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, funded a $250,000 study that explored the potential for taxing home equity. We'll touch on that, sure. Right now in Canada, uh, when you sell your principal residence, so and I don't know whether it's 6 months or a year, but where you live, okay? And most people, if they own a home, they've been in it a year or more. So when you sell your principal residence, you are exempt from capital gains tax. And the way that capital gains tax works is this currently. When you make a capital, if you buy a stock and you spend $5,000 on it, and then you're a really good stock picker and it goes up to 10 6 months later, and you sell it, you've generated a capital gain. And the gain is, in this case, $5,000. You put out 5,000 to buy it, you sold it for 10. So the gain, what you earned, is $5,000. And there is something called the capital gains exemption. And the first 50% of your gain, so $2,500, is tax free. You don't pay tax on the first 2,500. The other 2,500 has to be claimed as income, and you are taxed on that at your marginal rate. So, however, depending upon how much money you make in a year from all your sources, you might pay 20, 30, 40%. If you're in a high income bracket, you're going to be paying higher. Now, your home primary residence has always been excluded from that capital gains tax. Well, what Max Power was writing about, CMHC, Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, what they're studying is potentially lifting that exemption. And what that would mean is, let's say you have a couple in their 80s and they're counting on their house to finance their retirement, and you can't eat your house. And frequent little saying in the financial planning industry is you can't eat your house. But a lot of people, what they do is they get into their 80s and they know they have a house that's now worth $1 million. They live somewhere in the GTA, and I'll keep the math simple, but they bought it years and years and years ago. They bought it when they were in their 30s or 40s. It's paid off, and they only paid 100,000 for it. Now they have a $900,000 capital gain. And what would happen if they eliminate the capital gains exemption on home equity, because this is a paid off house. So the gain is 900,000, then 450,000 of that gain would have to be declared as income. And if you're declaring income of $450,000 in one fiscal calendar year, you're going to be at the top marginal rate, and you're going to lose darn near half. So your 400, you get 450 capital gains free, and the remaining 450, well, you don't get all of that. We're going to take about 200,000 of it away from you. And if you're people don't know how long they're going to live. One of the fastest growing demographic groups in this country is centurions, people living to be 100. So even a couple, someone in their late 70s, early 80s may need to finance another 20 plus years. And you're going to, giving up a couple hundred grand in taxes on your equity in your home is going to hurt. And anyway, so, and one thing it would do is it would mitigate against speculation in the housing market. But let me catch up. Let me catch up, because the messages are now flying in fast and furious. And I do like to keep up. I love the commentary. You guys, honestly, are amazing. Uh, and SRCX says about where he lives, the Yukon, where men are men and sheep are nervous. I thought that was Scotland or New Zealand, but whatever. Always got to inject some humor. I'm going to throw in a joke that my 11-year-old, just constipation. Okay, I'm lagging. No, I'm back. Sorry about that little break when I found out a fix for when my connection becomes unstable. It's that famous thing of reboot, turn it off and on again. So I exit out and come back in. I didn't know I could do that, but I can. So let me catch up. Uh, where was I? Oh, yeah, I was telling you that joke. The joke my 11-year-old told me. So did you hear about the movie that came out 4 or 5 years, or that was produced? They made a movie 4 or 5 years ago. Did you hear about it? It was about constipation. Oh, you haven't heard about it? It never came out. My 11-year-old. Um, okay, so I'm just getting catch up, and I got to go on live chat instead of sorry for this. Okay, so I did the CMHC. Um, Betty is writing that the real estate talk like $1 million for a home is nothing. I can't see making that kind of money unless you're a CEO. I'm very fortunate. Moved to Brighton in 2015, and this area, the housing market was somewhat much cheaper than the GTA. I don't want to divulge what I paid for the house, but incredibly reasonable and a fraction of what it would have cost. The same house would have cost in the GTA. And but since then, so many people are cashing in their $1 million lottery tickets in Toronto. A lot of them are moving out this way. They're moving out to Coburg, Port Hope, Brighton, Trenton, and the housing market has gone insane. A house down the road from me sold for an insane amount of money back in 2021. I think it was. It was right during COVID, and there were a lot of people in the GTA looking to get out of Toronto, and there were bidding wars and everything. And I thought to myself, dang, I should have sold back then and gone to Caracat, New Brunswick, or to Lethbridge, Alberta. Lethbridge would be better. Anyway, let me catch up. Uh, and that's the thing with the real estate market is because so many people come in from overseas. I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. What you have is people living in India go to university, they get high levels of education, engineering, medicine, technical. They're highly skilled, highly educated, but they don't want to live in India because the standard of living is very poor. And so they go to the Middle East. They go to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, to the Emirates States or Saudi, and they go there and they're paid in US dollars. There's zero income tax, and they're making very good six-figure salaries in US dollars. And quite often it's a, double income family. So they're making $400,000 a year, maybe living on less than one salary a year, banking hundreds of thousands of US dollars every year. And they go when they're in their early 20s and they're there for 15, 20 years. They get into their early 40s. Their kids are now getting to be university age or just after. And you cannot retire as a foreign national in Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or any of these countries. So then they've got their, maybe 10 million Canadian, maybe more. And then they start to look, where do we want to move? They don't want to go back to India. So they start looking at Canada, Australia, the United States, and they go in and they typically will gravitate to the large urban centers, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, and housing doesn't phase them. Oh, it's $1.5 million? No problem. I'll buy two. And then individuals living in Toronto, they cash their lottery ticket. Now they got $1.5 million and they move out to a town like where I live, Brighton, and they start bidding up the houses out here. And it's insane. And, for those already in the housing market, they're like, oh, yay, thank you. Thank you, Justin Trudeau, for wide open immigration and for bolstering the price of my house. You know, thank you. So, um, and what's SRCX writing? He's saying that Polyev should have distanced himself immediately from the 30% of Albertans that support the idea of Canada becoming a 51st state. You know what? I like I said, I was something of a lone voice back in January, late December, early January, speculating that a Carney-led government or a Carney-led liberal party could resurrect liberal fortunes. And the messages on here were, "You're crazy. Canadians will never vote for another liberal." Blah 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 blah. And knowing that Mark Carney is coming in, and a lot of people don't pay close attention to the news. They simply sit down, watch CBC, CTV Global. They tell them that, oh, Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England. Oh, wow, superstar. Oh, okay. And and I say it all the time. I started this video saying it, programming us what to think, what to believe, how to feel, and they can spin things. They know how to write. They know how to propagandize the population. When they will report on Mark Carney's photographs with Ghislaine Maxwell. They do cover it, but they do it in a way to tell Canadians, but you don't have to worry about this, the same way they did about Justin Trudeau's blackface. They reported on it, but in a way that told Canadians it's not anything worth worrying about. What they'll say is, now there are calls from extreme right, alt-right type individuals who are trying to make a big deal of this. Oh, I don't want to be, I'm not one of those. Oh, I listen to CBC. They tell me to stay away from the alt-right. Oh, so if CBC tells me that's an alt-right, extreme right opinion, well, that's not me. I'm not extremist. And so that's the way they frame it. It's similar to the Ottawa convoy protest when you had one guy going around with a Confederate flag on Parliament Hill, and they tried to conflate that to everybody. Uh, what lost Pierre Poilievre the election ultimately was the utter and total collapse of the NDP and the Green to a degree as well. The vote coalesced. It became a binary choice between the Libs and the Conservatives. And in my writing is, kind of exemplary of that fact. The Conservative candidate, Philip Lawrence, won the riding. He got 49.7% of the vote. What did the Liberal get? 45. Between the Liberal and the Conservative, it was 95. That was 95% of the vote. 95. There were 5 other candidates on the ballot. So between Philip Lawrence, Conservative, and John Goheen, Liberal, there were 95% of the ballots. The other 5% were spread among 5 other candidates. That's how binary the election was. If you added the PPC, they got 0.7%. That would, the right side, the two rightward parties, the two right of center parties, got over 50%, but not by a lot, like maybe 50.4. Let's read on. Everyone's saying good evening, and I've got someone writing. Oh, I hate it when it jumps around like this. Gordon, I've had to reboot several times to comment on channels. Feel your pain. Hey, it happens. And I'm just glad you're here. I'm glad everyone's here. I so enjoy these. I wasn't going to do one tonight, but then I was checking out some news stories on Alberta separation, and a year from now, I think it could be what has happened in the province of Alberta is that Danielle Smith, the premier, leader of the United Conservative Party of Alberta, they have lowered the bar on the number of signatures needed on a petition to create something like a referendum. And I believe the number is 10% of the total ballots cast in the most recent provincial election. So if 3 million Albertans vote in a provincial election, then according to my math, 10% would be 300,000. You get 300,000 signatures on a petition saying that Alberta should withdraw from Confederation. And now it would be put to a referendum. Now it could, Alberta needs to have a referendum on separating from Canada. If 300,000 people will sign a petition saying that, then it can go forward. And then we're into a situation like was in around 81, 82. I forget when the first Quebec sovereignty referendum was. And then there was another one about a decade later, 10, 11, 12 years later. And the one in 91, 92, that one damn near succeeded. Quebec almost left Confederation. They almost voted to separate. It was like 50.2 to 49.8 with 50.2 wanting to stay in Canada, but 49.8 voted yes, let's leave. Let's see what I love what Danny's writing. Jesus is king. At the end of the day, I'm not a Canadian. I'm a Christian, which there's a lot of scary things on the horizon. There are a lot of scary things on the horizon. This online harms bill scares me. They split it into two parts, but it all died with the election call. But Carney has spoken about resurrecting it, and if that happens, and the portion that deals with harmful speech harmful speech. And religious conviction is not an exemption. So when you read in Genesis that, male and female, he created them, two sexes, two genders, binary, male and female. Well, you can't, if someone is butthurt by that, I'm offended. He said there's only two genders. I say there's 189 or a gazillion, an unlimited, infinity. He's offending me. They could make a complaint to this legislation talks about impaneling a group of people unelected to adjudicate when online harms have occurred. And would it be a slap on the wrist? Would I be forced into a re-education center? Uh, this is it's one of those situations I mentioned in my last video that it's easy to talk about, well, if that happens to me, I'll do this. Is it a hill that I'm willing to die on? We'll find out when we get to it. I'd like to say I'm sure, but I'm not at this point. But I think I've got the moral fortitude to stand my ground and to take whatever comes. I did it during the COVID era when I refused to roll up my sleeve and I had to put up with all kinds of garbage and no apologies. No apologies from those who went along and made life so hard on individuals who stood up for bodily autonomy. No one's apologizing. I have had people express admiration. Say, "Wow, that takes guts," and I admire you for doing that, but I couldn't do it. Anyway, let me read on. JCP is writing that our elderly neighbors passed away, and a developer renovated the home sneakily, left 3 walls up, so didn't need a new home permit that would have taken months, sold for almost $1 million. It's insane. And it's got to be, I'm guessing, in and around a major urban center, probably Toronto or something. And then he goes on to say, our home had an estimated value of under 500,000 at that time. It's insane. My taxes are going through the roof. Yeah, and Danny is saying we're in terms of economic performance per capita GDP out of the 20 largest economies in the world. This is what Danny is writing. We are number 20 per capita gross domestic product divided by the population per capita, and we're 20th. Canada as a nation performs just about on par with the great state of Mississippi. I've never been to Mississippi, but we all have that pejorative view. I always, yeah, the song, but a ding, 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 dueling banjos plays in my mind when I think of Mississippi. Although I think that movie was filmed in Tennessee or was depicting Tennessee. What's Danny writing? Or SRCX is a smart developer. Yeah. Um, and Betty Zoom is saying that her home in Saskatchewan Riverfront home, 1986, 450,000 in 1986. Wow, that's massive. But there's no more. But Betty goes on to say there's no more of that. And JCP with respect to what SRCX saying, smart developer. Yeah, JCP. Oh, my battery. The joys of a high production value YouTube channel podcast. There we go. And so JCP is saying yes, and many in the hood were excited because it's going to raise home values. Between this and last year's assessment on our home, it's gone up 100 grand, and up go the property taxes. That's what I've been hit with. Um, and this, SRCX thinks that 450K way back in 1986 is an exaggeration. I'm going to be kind. I ask it, be kind with each other. I mean, gosh, I hate the polarization in this world. I hate the inability of people to disagree without, like, we can disagree without having to be disagreeable. Anyway, Max is writing, Trump confirmed today that between Carney and Polyev, Carney hated him the least. Trump explicitly said he wanted the Liberals to win. He'd love a unity crisis and try to capture Alberta and Saskatchewan. Trump is always, he's the deal maker and he's a bully. Tell you how he bought his house, that Mar-a-Lago down in Key West. Um, Historic, famous property that whoever owned it or built tried to bequeath it to the federal government, but the upkeep costs were too high. They pictured it as a summer retreat for the president. They wanted to give it to the government, but the U.S. government said it costs too much to keep this place going. So it was eventually sold by the owners. After I think the original individual had died, his family sold it, and they were asking $20 million, 20 million. And Donald Trump came and he said, I'll buy it. I'll give you $15 million. Might seem good, but it's 5 million below the ask. That's a big, it's quite a low ball. 5 million less than they were asking. So they declined the offer. And then what Donald Trump did was there was undeveloped property between Mar-a-Lago and the ocean. Mar-a-Lago has an oceanfront view, but it did not include the property between it and the ocean. And Donald Trump bought that undeveloped property for $1 or $2 million. Then he immediately threatened that he was going to develop the property, and then that would block Mar-a-Lago's view of the ocean. They would lose their oceanside view. And immediately that sent interest in Mar-a-Lago plummeting. No one wanted to buy it. Well, he's going to put up a condo. He's going to put up a Trump Tower, and now we won't be able to see the ocean. I don't want it. And then, with no one else willing to buy it, Trump came in and said, "Give you 7 million or something like that." I'd have to recheck the details, the specifics. But then he came in way lower, and they were forced to take it. If they'd taken they got far less. They could have had 15 million. They only ended up with 7 or 8 million. And Trump, instead of paying 15, He got Mar-a-Lago for 7 or 8 million and the adjacent property for 1 or 2. So he spent less than 10 million after originally offering 15. Trump knows how to wheel and deal, and he's not afraid to play dirty. You could call that dirty if you want, but it's legal. He didn't do anything illegal, and he got what he wanted. Uh, so I wonder if I'm going to be honest here. I'm going to say that Trump, no matter who won, he was going to take credit. Carney wins, he's like, he's my guy. He's the guy I wanted. I helped him, right? I'll get no credit, but that's okay. I never do. Trump will do that. And if Polyev had won, Trump likewise would have, yes, the conservative, the right conservative Republican movement, and we're moving into Canada now. It's all because of me. Either way, he's going to claim a win. I'm here to say that. Uh, so, but I honestly think that Polyev would have been a better individual to deal with Trump than Carney, at least in terms of protecting Canada's sovereignty. Carney is a globalist. Carney's attachment to Canada is a centimeter deep. He doesn't have roots here. He hasn't lived here for 15, 20 years. He only moved back. Oh, I get to be prime minister? Okay, I'll move back to Canada. But I'll even cancel my other 2 passports so long as I win the election. If I don't win the election, I'm keeping my Irish and UK passports. Anyway, and I like that your Betty Zoom is. I know that the Saskatchewan economy back in the 80s was booming because of potash. Potash was huge, and it was causing a boom in the market. We had Wild Bill Hickok or Wild Bill something, who was talking about trying to buy an NHL team and move them to Saskatoon. The Saskatchewan was hot back in the 80s, so I'm not that surprised. Um, JCP says we bought our home 32 years ago for $15,000. I didn't pay that little. I will say, I don't want to talk about my own home value or anything like that, but my dad, back in 1971, 72, somewhere around there, I think it would have been 72. He bought his very first home in the town of Glen Rock, New Jersey. We rented for a year when we moved to New Jersey. And then my dad went to buy his first home. And he paid in and around 30-ish thousand dollars a year. And at that time, and we talked about this while he was still alive, he was probably earning $11,000, $12,000 a year. So his first house cost 3 times his annual income. Now let's say you're making 75,000. Let's say you're making $100,000 a year, 6-figure income. Are you going to find a house for $300,000? You're going to have a hard time. You might be able to get a bus shelter in Mississauga for 300,000, and you're going to have to share it. It'll be subdivided into a duplex. Like, it's insane real estate values. Well, my dad was able to buy his very first home in around 1972, and it was 30,000 American. He was probably making 11, 12. Now, a house for $1 million, by that same math, you'd be, need to be making 333, 340 grand. It's crazy. And anyway, I'm just trying to catch up. Sharunian, who's now Pathman Construction, right? Everything is so expensive thanks to these bleeding parasites. Well, Carney, Trudeau, are believe in this concept of post-nationalism. And this is what is so ironic, but most Canadians don't pay attention. Most people were distracted. The election was a distraction from the NHL playoffs. Oh, well, I'll go onto that Compass website and they'll ask me some questions and they'll tell me who to vote for. A lot of people did stuff like that. They don't pay attention to the issues. They don't, and if you talk to them, they are very skeptical of anything you have to say. Because there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation. Yes, there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation floating around in the general chatter, but there's also a lot of misinformation and disinformation from CBC, CTV, and Global. But they believe everything that television says because it has authority and high production value. I'm just going to try and catch up. Everyone's talking about real estate value. SRCX is asking what we're all going to do when food prices triple, pay expenses or eat. We'll see. It hasn't hit yet, but it's coming. This is an interesting thing to speculate on. What's going to happen with this so-called tariff war? Is Canada going to reciprocate? We've had a bit of a pause. I think it was a 90-day pause. I'm not sure when that 90-day pause ends exactly. I think it's the end of May. So are we going to be back in a trade war? Who knows? And SRCX, talking about my faith, says, a Christian, does God even exist? I'm going to state, you see the glory of his work everywhere you go. Now, maybe you think that a hummingbird and something as simple as a mosquito, these incredibly complex, beautiful, that these life forms just poof, time plus matter plus luck. Luck brought it about. It's chance, and we're all just matter in motion. Intellectually, I can't wrap my head around that. The laws of thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics regarding entropy. Highly ordered states fall into collapse. Doesn't go the other way around. Order falls from disorder. You never get order out of disorder. And the James Webb Space Telescope, which is scientists have told us is looking to the very outer edge of the outer edge of the universe. And because the images coming back that we're capturing are taking billions of light years to get to us, that we are seeing what the universe looked like after the supposed, what they refer to as the Big Bang. What did the universe look like? And they had models. They already had built models. And the models predicted that we would see chaotic matter floating around before the formation of galaxies. And then they were shocked. This is, right at the time of the Big Bang, just after it, when we expected our models showed that there would be just matter floating around chaotically, we're seeing fully formed galaxies. What the frick? That doesn't make sense. Our model was wrong. It's like the models they have for climate science predictions that are always wrong. What do you mean? Fully formed galaxies. So time plus matter plus chance. Sorry, SRCX. I just can't wrap my head around that. And Betty has to hope you're feeling well. Betty left a message on my previous video saying she's been a little under the weather. So prayers to you, prayers to everyone. Hope you're either fully recovered or if you're not fully recovered, that you're well on the mend. I'm assuming you are because you were here. Great to see you. JCP says that the city says our home is now worth almost 700. And if the city says that, if that's your assessment, you can bet that it's probably worth more. Interest rates are still reasonable, 4 or so percent. They're still reasonable. Let's see. And Danny's quoting Ephesians, as he so often does. And I hate the way this thing jumps around. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Let me read my translation. I read the Standard Revised. So let me get to Ephesians. That's before Hebrews, before Philemon, before Titus, before Timothy, before Thessalonians, Ephesians, and it is 6:12. I want to read my translation. For we are not contending against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. That's how I usually translate, is to say heavenly places, or must jail people for social media offenses. Meanwhile, real violent criminals are immediate bail to reoffend endlessly. Yeah, insane, insane. Catch and release. Um, and Danny says, and this is a rule of engagement, that all battle plans get thrown out the window at first contact, at first engagement. Uh, there's all kinds of these great little military bromides. One is that um, large assault that you're focusing on repelling. That's just the diversion. That is one thing you learn in the military when everyone gets their position around a perimeter defense. And in fire teams, usually two guys, and you're told to hold your position and not to vacate it, because that's what an enemy force will do, is they'll go and they'll send they want to make it appear that there's a big attack coming this way, so that everyone will run to that spot, and then they can have a secondary force, which probably is bigger than the surprise attack, and they'll come in from behind. Uh, Max is writing, remember, reminder that the liberal online harms bill included a provision for life imprisonment for vaguely defined speech. Civil Liberties Associations criticized it for potentially being unconstitutional, but we saw what happened, and we have a prime minister now who has announced his intention to use the full powers of the full emergency powers of the office of the Prime Minister of Canada to get Canada through this crisis that we're in. Crisis Carney, that's what I'm calling him. And it's going to be a crisis. And what that crisis is going to be, I think we're going to, I haven't said it for a while, but I think we're going to be hit with so many things at once. It's taking longer than I expected, but that's one thing I have something of what is called an immediacy bias. I'm a rip the band-aid off, just bring it. Stop with this Chinese water torture. Just bring it on. Let's go. I hate guerrilla warfare. I want to get meat out on the open field of battle. Okay, you want me to get a jab? You want me to take two shots? No way. I'm not doing it. Hit me. Oh, I can't go to a restaurant. I can't get on a plane. I can't get on a train. I can't work in the army anymore. Okay, fine. Yeah. But bring it out in the open. None of this incremental crap. It drives me crazy. Um, And then JCP is writing that the current sure doesn't want it to. I don't think you wrote that the way that best way. Uh, and JCP thinks something I said was 100% on the mark. Sometimes I get things right. Um, and Max is saying, with respect to the online harms bill, that the Carney government will try to pass it again. And given the numbers that they have, 169 seats, they only, and remember, another thing is, when they have a vote in the House of Commons, if for whatever reason, let's say that there are only 300 of the 343 MPs sitting that day, some are on vacation, some are there's 43 sick people, there's a bad case of the flu going through Parliament, 300 people there. If legislation is put forward and voted on, then you only need 151 votes. So um, they're not going to have any trouble passing legislation. Um, Max believes that Polyev would have made a unity crisis less likely. Pierre said Alberta wanting clarity on emissions caps was reasonable. Carney says one thing in the West, another thing in the East. He says one thing to Alberta, another thing to Quebec. And I always use the term, he's sucking and blowing at the same time. It depends who he's talking to. He talks out of both sides of his mouth. And Alberta needs to develop its energy. And getting back to the theme of this video about Albertan separation, even if Alberta separates and becomes its own separate entity, the Commonwealth of Alberta, or Alberta and Saskatchewan merge to become one unified country, they still don't have access to tidewater. They can't still are beholden to the United States of America. That's the only customer for their product. And it would make sense at that point for Alberta to join and genuinely Alberta on its own, or Alberta, Saskatchewan, to become that 51st state. And that would end Canada. Canada then would cease to exist. This nation was forged on the idea of an economic partnership from east to west. That's how Sir John A. Macdonald unified this country. It started out as 4 provinces. It started out as Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. And then in the years that ensued, sometime around 1870, that's when BC joined, and the British government purchased what was then known as Prince Rupert's Land from the Hudson's Bay Corporation, and they gave the land to this new Dominion of Canada. So we had this big, huge territory that was part of the nation state of Canada. And then Sir John A. Macdonald succeeded in having a transcontinental railway built in record time. Amazing how quickly it happened. Like I think it was like 2 years or something like that. I'd have to look back at the history. It's been a long time since I took Canadian history. And we forged, that's what forged this country together. And if all of a sudden you stuck, and the reason Canada came together, it was out of a desire to be not to be swallowed up by the United States. A lot of Canadians only became Canadians after the American Revolutionary War. They were called when the American colonies declared war on declared war on Great Britain with their Declaration of Independence. The war had actually already started, but they made a formal declaration of war on July 4, 1776, when they signed their Declaration of Independence. That was a formal declaration. And not all Americans were revolutionaries. Some were loyalists. They wanted to stay loyal to England. They wanted to stay loyal to the crown. And so some actually fought on the side of the British. And when the British ultimately lost, the Americans, those loyal British subjects in the American colonies, found their homes being burned. They were persona non grata. And so the British Crown said, come up to Canada, come up to Upper Canada, Lower Canada, wherever, and we'll give you land. We'll give you, and the area I live in is loyalist country. Belleville has loyalist college. Kingston, huge loyalist area. And there's a loyalist village here that tries to recreate what life was like back when these British well, they were Americans from the American colonies, but who had remained loyal, and they moved up here. And so when there was this fear of the US, they had this doctrine of manifest destiny, that the United States is destined to dominate the North American landscape. And it wasn't that long ago, 1867, the the U.S. Revolutionary War, there were people alive who had firsthand memory of it, and or a parent or grandparent who had fought for the British down there and don't want to be American. And so the Canadian project, if you want to call it that, started. And around 1870, that's when Canada came to be what we know of it today, minus, of course, Newfoundland. Newfoundland didn't join until I think it was 1949. And so if you take Alberta or Alberta, Saskatchewan, and block off BC, this country is over. And then if Alberta and Saskatchewan separate, how long would it take for Quebec to say, well, if they can leave, we can leave too. We're even more distinct than they are. We have our own language, our own culture, our own civil law code, as opposed to, the British common law. They have French civil law in Quebec to this day. So, and that's it. Canada's done. Canada's done. And that's, so unity crisis. But ultimately, the globalists want everyone living, we're citizens of planet Earth controlled by one centralized world government that's going to resemble something like what they have in communist China. SRCX, how many years were you in the armed forces? 11 plus, almost 12. Were you, what were your rank and responsibilities? Did you ever meet? No, I didn't. Williamson was before my time here at Trenton. I joined in 2010, left in 2021. I joined at the age of 43. I was signed until I was 60. You sign a contract. And I worked in the communication branch, otherwise known as Signals, Royal Canadian Corps of Signals. So I worked in a message. I worked in a radar station and the base ComSend communication center. It was the base message center. All the message traffic was funneled through us, and then it would go in different directions. And a lot of secret, top secret, confidential stuff that we'd have to. The protocols were insane. JCP is writing at Max. I got to shake his hand at the Calgary rally. Oh, very good. I squeezed his hand. He squeezed mine back. He felt to me like he was genuine and really cares about our country and the people living in it. In 1979, 13 years of age, Pierre Elliott Trudeau came and gave a speech at Henry Street High School in Whitby, and I was there. And I shook Pierre Elliott Trudeau's hand as he went through the crowd, and it was a wet fish. I still remember, even at 13. And SRCX has a home up on Lac Tremblant in the Laurentians, north of Montreal. Okay, just be awesome. Carney kept talking about crisis. Chaos is what he wants. Chaos is when there's something called crisis management. If you want to get things changed, absent a crisis is very hard, because as long as things are working, if you want to impose radical fundamental change to any structure, you need a crisis. Without a crisis, you cannot, with a complicated structure or something like society, you can't affect serious radical change unless there's a crisis. And then what we got to do, and then the resistance to change melts away. Well, it's a crisis. We got to do something. And that's why you manufacture a crisis. They wanted to bring in a digital ID, and they have already stated, bodies like the World Economic Forum and even the European Union have said that the vaccine passport has laid the groundwork for an eventual digital ID. By design, a manufactured crisis to implement what Trudeau in September of 2020 gave an address to the UN by video conference. And he said, this pandemic, or COVID, presents us with an opportunity for a reset. This is our opportunity to put the world on a path towards sustainable development. The idea being that the way we're going right now is not sustainable. I'm here to tell you it is. Satan, the enemy, the liar from the beginning, the father of all lies, loves to preach scarcity. God always preaches abundance. We heard all the way back in the 80s, 90s, they started to talk about peak oil, peak oil. The world's oil reserves are going to peak out in and around the year 2000. That was the prediction. And that's when demand for oil would outstrip supply. There would be more demand for oil than the capacity to produce it. And that was called peak oil. Caused a huge bubble in oil prices. Turned out to be completely false. We've got tons, we're swimming in oil. Let's see. And Danny, getting back to faith, says believing in the Big Bang is akin to believing a tornado can rip through an aircraft scrapyard and render a flyable 747. That's basically the way I look at it. However, I'm willing to, I don't think that the Big Bang Theory and the Christian faith are necessarily irreconcilable. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Time, the beginning. We have time. God created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. Now, the Big Bang goes on to say that it just floated around for billions of years chaotically and then magically came together like that tornado going through an airport's or an airline's scrapyard and reassembling 747. But that's not what the James Webb telescope is telling us. They're finding fully formed galaxies at or near the start of the birth of what they believe was the universe. What existed outside of the singularity before the Big Bang, and they say the universe is expanding. What is it expanding into? These are questions science cannot answer, so they leave it alone. SRCX, disinformation, false information intended to mislead, especially propaganda issued by a government organization to a rival power or the media or your own citizens. We were propagandized into believing that COVID was the bubonic plague, that it was more than 10 times worse than seasonal flu. And seasonal flu, influenza, I think it's 2018, it killed over 8,000, I think it was 8,511, going off my memory. 2018, I think it was 8,511 Canadians killed by the flu, directly as a cause of the flu, not, PCR test and, you got hit by a car, well, you get put in the COVID totals. No, not like that. These were 8,500 people who died, 8,511 who died directly as a direct result of influenza, deadly disease. And we were told that COVID was more than 10 times worse. Really? Yeah. It would rip through a retirement home or a nursing home or a hospice, a long-term care, where people are at the natural end of natural life expectancy. And then people died and people got afraid. And then we turned around to kids, children, and said, sorry, but you have to shelter in place with you're sorry, you're in an abusive household, but you have to shelter in place with your abuser. And we're going to declare booze essential. It was insane what we put up with. But, well, I care about the elderly. I don't care about those kids. Screw the kids. If my dear old Uncle Joe can have another 6 months of diaper changes, he gets a lot of government money coming in. It'll increase my inheritance. So let's save dear old Uncle Joe for a few months. Maybe he can make it to 89. And screw those poor kids, forget the poor kids, screw the kids. Horrible what we did. What's Max writing? Atheists say, give me one free miracle and I can explain everything. That free miracle is the creation of the universe and all life from nothing, the Big Bang, yet they ridicule belief in God. I've spoken about this before. You need my favorite argument that atheists will put out is abiogenesis. And they say that the biggest hole in the whole evolutionary origin of species argument is it is said that life sprang out magically out of the primordial soup due to spontaneous generation, just the right mixture of proteins, amino acids, and whatever else in this primordial soup maybe a lightning bolt came down or something, and life came into being. Single-celled organisms. Okay, forget about the evolutionary process. They have tried, scientists have tried for over 100 years, 200 years probably, going back to the 1800s. Pasteur was the first famous guy to try and replicate or try and prove that Darwin was right. He wanted to prove that Darwin was right, that you can animate lifeless matter. Failed, failed, failed. Every experiment trying to animate lifeless matter has failed, and it's led to the scientific conclusion that only life can create life. Only life begats life. So then there has to be a first mover. And we use the word God because we haven't got a better word for he is, he exists, God. And so to counteract this law that only life begats life is those who believe in Darwin's origin of species, they say, well, it's abiogenesis. And the conditions needed to animate lifeless matter did exist billions of years ago. Atmospheric conditions and things were different back then. And that's why we can't test for it now. We can't test for it now because the conditions needed only existed billions of years ago for a window of time, and that window is closed. So then I will say to them, okay, so you just believe it on blind faith. Guess what? That's my belief in God is based on blind faith, believing without seeing. Blessed, Thomas, you believe because you have seen. Blessed are those who believe without having seen. Let's read what's being. I'm just going to scroll through and then I'm going to wrap up. Problem, reaction, talking, getting back to crisis management, Danny, problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem, wait for the reaction, offer the solution to the problem you created. Crisis management. SRCX says, I don't know if God does. What I would suggest you do is still your mind. Some people call it meditate. You can call it prayer. You can call it introspection. It's hard to quiet your mind. It's a very hard thing to do. What I recommend doing is I try and picture a point of light as my eyes are closed, and I try to fixate in on that singular point of light. And when thoughts come into my head, you can't help them. I just try and let them float away like a cloud and just go away. And you can get a very peaceful feeling. SRCX says, don't tell me that intellectually, I cannot wrap my head around this idea of spontaneous generation. Poof, life out of nothing. And I cannot wrap my head around how the second law of thermodynamics regarding entropy, this, the natural order of things in the universe is to decay. I can't wrap my head around how doesn't make sense. It's like Danny gave that great analogy of a tornado whipping through a graveyard of old airplanes. Doesn't matter how many times you put it together, you're never going to get a 747, and you're never going to get a mosquito to just miraculously. And when it comes to the evolutionary, single-celled organisms were the first life forms. They say, well, we have them now. We have amoebas, we have paramecium, we have Hydra. We've got these single-celled organisms exist. And then we're told that they evolved into 2-cell, 4-cell, 8-cell, 16-cell, and then into us. I don't know how many cells we are. It's got to be millions, billions. Okay, well, we still have those single-celled organisms. I just named 3 of them, the Hydra, the paramecium, and the amoeba. Where are the 2 cells? Don't have any. 4. What about 4? Nope, they don't exist either. What about 8? Nope, no 8-celled organisms. So we have the beginning, and we have us and everything else in between, but we don't have any of the 4, 6, 8 that they say existed. They became extinct, but the single-celled organisms upon which everything grew out of, we still have those. Whatever. We're going to get into a metaphysical, thermodynamic type, metaphysical meta, I'm losing my vocabulary now, but we're getting into the realm of metaphysics, alternate dimensions, which physics has proven with the CERN collider, the Hadron collider, and wherever that is in Switzerland. JCP, right? It's at SRCX. I will ask you though why you are on Gordon's channel if you don't believe as he. Actually, I welcome it. Being challenged is a great way to confirm. Apologetics is a great way to solidify your own belief. And I'm here to share. And if SRCX wants to investigate, you're not going to get saved on the internet. You're not going to come to a belief in God from the internet. And again, I use the term God just because that's the best we got in the English language. Um, and SRCX should know already, and everyone should. I'm something of a free speech absolutist. I don't want the government saying to me, "You shut up and sit down," and we're gonna, well, if that's the way if I want to be treated in a manner where I'm free to express myself, it would be hypocritical as hell for me to turn around and say to someone, "I don't like what you're saying. Get out of here." Never do it. Uh, uh, oh, JCP and SRCX. Gloves are coming on, whatever. Uh, I get the feeling SRCX just likes he's a certain type of disturber. I think you can figure out what the first word is. He just likes to stir things up. Uh, oh, a disturber. He just likes to stir the pot. I get it because I've been there. I've done it myself. Years ago, I'll tell you a funny story and then I'm going to wrap up. Funny story is this. I had two friends who had been teaching school in Korea, and they were over and they were back home from Korea over the Christmas holidays, but they didn't have a place to live. So they went to my buddy's place, they went to his wife's place, they went to a friend's place, they came to my place. They were like hobos for about a month, spending a week here, a few days there, a few days there. And I was going to pick them up. They were going from friends in Pickering to my apartment in Toronto. And so I was there to pick them up. And they'd been in Korea. And one of the things they had brought back from Korea was one of those big box kites, because kite flying is apparently very big in China and in South Korea. So I had one of these big kites. Now, the thing you have to know is my buddy's wife is Jewish. And so we're getting ready to go. And then my buddy, Bruce, says, "Oh, wait a minute, where's the kite?" And I, being a smart aleck, because his wife wasn't in the front foyer there, I went, "Oh, and Andy, she was in the back room. She's just getting her coat." And they all looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" He was asking about it, why are you talking about Andy? And I went, "Oh, kite. I thought you said kike." And they were like, "Oh my God." Because that's kike is a derogatory term for a Jew. And anyone who watches my channel knows that I am not anti-Semitic in any way, shape, or form, but I like to stir the pot. And so, that was actually quite funny. I think I've told this story before where a buddy of mine, Dave, and I were playing golf over at Riverside Golf Course in Pickering. And we're on the first, second, we're on the third hole. I know that course well. I played it 100 times probably. And we're sitting down. He's a black guy from Indianapolis, great guy. And we're sitting there, and it's his first time living in Canada. And I complimented him on his house, and his amazing house he and his wife had bought, and complimented on it. And he said, I love it. I love it. I got 5 bathrooms. I got one for every day of the week. I just got to constipate myself on the weekend. And he goes, "But when we moved here, I didn't know if we could live in that neighborhood." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, well, down in India, I can buy any house I want. You can't stop me, but I know that in some neighborhoods you'll have a pickup truck with five angry white boys in the flatbed looking to make trouble. And he goes, but y'all don't have that here in Canada. And I said, well, maybe South Oshawa. And he went like, oh, okay. And then later he mentioned that he was playing at Angus Glen, which is a very pricey course. And in order to use the putting green to practice your putting before playing, you had to pay $10. And he said, I'd never seen that before, having to pay $10 to use the putting green. That's crazy. The putting green, it's part of your greens fees. Why are they charging extra for the putting green? And I looked at him and I said, Dave, that's just because you're black. And he literally fell off. We were waiting to tee off. He literally fell off the bench laughing. And I practically, his laughter made me laugh. It was great. Uh, let's see. Blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, this is just a belief, SRCX. But I haven't read up enough on it, but I believe that every time you have a thought, a feeling, an emotion, there are brain waves, like radio waves, like microwaves, like Wi-Fi. We're emitting into the ether these waves. Every thought, view, opinion, emotion, everything's going out there constantly. And when we die, this physical coil decays and can no longer support life. I think we are there's an element within us that is reconnected to all that that's where I say, where people talk, not where I say, but where people say they saw their life flash before their eyes. I think there's I got to do some more reading on it, but there's, how much time do you have? There's this notion that when the human body dies at the moment of death, that it loses so many ounces, and they've measured it apparently. I think there is mass to a soul, and I think it reconnects with that. And then I do believe in the judgment. I do believe in judgment. I do believe we're going to be held to account. And I do know that I am severely wanting. I have enormous regrets. There are things I should not have done. Times when I was incredibly selfish, times when I was just looking after, me and not concerning myself with the welfare of anyone else but myself. And I know I have a mountain of sin covering me. And now maybe you don't feel that way. Maybe you feel like you're the greatest thing in the world and that you've never done anything wrong. That's much of the Old Testament. They did what was right in their own eyes. That's the whole message of the Garden of Eden story. Satan whispering in the ear of Eve and saying, you can be a God unto yourself. You don't need God telling you right from wrong. You can decide for yourself what is right and wrong. You can offer yourself, it's okay. Indulge yourself. Be decadent. Sate your every desire. It's okay. Anyway. Looks like a lot of banter going on. Um, what's SRCX saying about the White House has been seized by right-wing Christian radicals. The Conservative Party under Polyev has a very similar. Canada's far more secular, and that's one of the biggest issues with the Conservative Party movement. We got within 42% of Canadians voted Conservative. Now, are some of those individuals Archie Bunker racists? Yep, there are some. Chances are, if someone is a racist, probably a better than 50-50 chance they're voting Conservative or PPC, voting on that side. Does that mean that everyone on that side of the aisle, on that side of the political spectrum, is a racist? Of course not. I'm not. I don't think anyone here is. I hope not. Melanin content means nothing. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. Max doesn't believe that Trump is actually a Christian. He was asked what his favorite Bible passage was, and he said, I love them all. he couldn't think of even one. Yeah. And it's like when I heard there was a Fox News commentator who was quoting from the Bible, and instead of saying Philippians, said Philippines or something like that. And I mean, it was so badly done. I mean, Ephesians, Thessalonians. I hate that one. Thessalonians. Yeah. Some things are hard to pronounce, but this pronunciation of Philippians, the church at Philippi, was so bad. Anyway, Anyway, I'm going to end it the way I always do. God bless. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord grant you peace. We'll see if there's anything to talk about tomorrow. Just to wrap up on the whole Alberta separation thing, I think we got to wait 6 months to a year, and we'll see. Is Carney going to do something to help Alberta get its oil and gas to get its resources to market, or is it going to continue to suck and blow at the same time, saying one thing in Alberta, another thing? You can only play that game for so long. You can only be duplicitous for so long, and Alberta's been waiting far too long. And if by the end of this year, if they don't see concrete movement going forward toward getting their products and their resources to international markets, then the only other real option is to join the United States, because then you're part of a bigger country. And I'm sure the United States would welcome Alberta and Saskatchewan, potash, goodness knows, probably countless other minerals, and the obvious oil and natural gas, the wheat, the farming industry. Alberta's a powerhouse. Alberta, Saskatchewan, put them together, that would be huge for the United States. And then I'll be looking to get it to move. It sucks that I'm the age I am now, pushing up near 60. How long do I have left? 15, 20, 25 years? Who knows? Anyway, good night, all. Danny, Max, SRCX, JCP, Betty, who's not here now, Sharunian, all you guys. You guys are amazing. And I will see you all again in a night or two. I might end up genuinely taking the night off tomorrow. We'll see. Anyway, talk to you later.